a good choice for the Fed. But if only. Donald Trump has not proved himself to be much of a talent scout. As president, he has tended to pick far-right zealots, inept toadies, conflicted swamp dwellers and unqualified family members for top jobs. So it is a relief that he picked a level-headed and competent person to lead the Federal Reserve, whose authority to direct interest rates and supervise banks gives it enormous influence over the economy. By choosing Jerome Powell, a Republican respected across the political spectrum, Mr. Trump has opted for continuity and stability rather than disruption and destruction. Mr. Powell has been a solid member of the Fed board since 2012 and has supported its current chairwoman, Janet Yellen, and her predecessor, Bernanke, as they work to revive the economy. Mr. Powell appears to share Ms. Yellen's view that while the economy has improved a lot in recent years, the time is not right for the Fed to raise interest rates rapidly and substantially. He is a far better choice than other candidates Mr. Trump was said to be considering. They included critics of the Fed who claimed in the wake of the 2008 crisis that the central bank was sowing the seeds for out-of-control inflation. Almost a decade later, there is still no sign of that. Other potential nominees have advocated for the deregulation of banks, which could imperil the financial system. That said, Mr. Trump would have made a much better decision had he offered Ms. Yellen a second term, in keeping with the tradition in which presidents have reappointed Fed leaders who were seen to be doing a good job, regardless of party affiliation. As Mr. Trump noted himself, Ms. Yellen has done a terrific job during a precarious time. Under her watch, unemployment fell to 4.1% last month, from 6.7% when she took over in 2014, and inflation has been well below the Fed's 2% target. The agency has also become a more vigilant supervisor of big banks. Of course, we have not always agreed with Ms. Yellen, particularly when the Fed has been overly fearful of inflation. Ms. Yellen may be tempted to leave the Fed now that she has been passed over for a second term as chairwoman. But her term on the bank's board of governors does not end until January 2024, and we hope she stays on. She is one of the most experienced and knowledgeable monetary policy experts in the world and would be incredibly valuable to Mr. Powell, a former lawyer who is not an economist by training. Further, by staying, she prevents Mr. Trump from appointing to the board someone inclined to weaken financial regulations. He has already chosen one such person, Randall Corliss, and there are 3 open seats. Ms. Yellen's would be the 4th. There are 7 seats in total. It is not entirely clear how the Fed under Mr. Powell, assuming he is confirmed, as is likely, will approach the bank's regulatory mission. He appears to favor some deregulation, experts say, but not a wholesale discarding of the post-crisis regulatory framework put in place under the Dodd-Frank law in the Bernanke and Yellen years. Having joined the Fed's board when the economy was still limping, Mr. Powell is surely aware of the dangers of returning banking to the bad old days that led to the devastating financial crisis of 2008. Senators ought to press him during his confirmation hearings about where he stands on questions like whether the Fed should reduce the reserves that banks are required to have on hand. It should not. And they ought to hold Mr. Trump's other nominees to the Fed board to the same tough scrutiny. Mr. Trump clearly chose Mr. Powell, in part because he did not want to scare investors and jeopardize the one good thing he has going, a growing economy. One can only hope that the president continues to keep that consideration in mind as he picks other nominees.